Hello. There we go. Um, Welcome to uh, the Institute for Psychotherapy of Psychiatry and Psychosis, the recovery series, and this video is on suicide and recovery. So we're getting more cheery as we go on. So, if you are ever being suicidal, what does it mean? If a person is or has ever been suicidal, what it means is that you've had an experience over time which has been past the point of bearing. When an experience past the point of bearing, the person goes from, or you as a person goes from a situation wanting to live to wanting to die. So the event becomes so overwhelming that you no longer live and you want to actually die. What happens then is that entire experience and the way to cope with it, which is that I want to die, is rendered unconscious. And that experience then subsequently in life arises into consciousness. Usually happens, as you know, at times of stress, times of transition, times when under drug use. And what comes out is not the experience which I no longer want to live through, but what comes out initially is the way to cope with that experience. So what happens is that what comes into consciousness is that I want to kill myself. Okay, so if you've ever been suicidal, it means you've had an experience past the point of bearing in which you've went from wanting to live to wanting to die, and that experience and the way to cope with it has been rendered unconscious to re-emerge later in life. And the part of the experience that re-emerges first is how to cope with it, which is want to die. So an example of that is, say, a young woman goes down to local town, starting third level education, university. She's whatever, 18 years of age, goes down for her first semester, goes down the first Friday night, goes out and gets hammered drunk. She's in a new situation, she's in a time of transition, and this means that in conjunction with the alcohol abuse or just being hammered, the defenses that her psyche has against unconscious or past experiences lowered. And what can happen is that this experience, the transmarginal experience, comes up into consciousness, and what comes first is I want to die. So the person, this young woman, absolutely out of the blue, without any indication prior to that to her friends or family, simply goes down the bridge and jumps off it. Because what's happened is this need to die, to end the painful experience, becomes absolutely overwhelming without any conscious awareness of why it is. So that's an example of suicidal intent. You then get, with people who are suicidal, you can get people who have an aspect of themselves existential, where they no longer wish to be alive, or life is too painful. And their person's experiences life is that life is overwhelming for me, and so on and so forth. But and it's called a subpersonality, an aspect of the person that can be labeled as no longer want to live or as depressed or whatever. In terms of suicidal intent, or the willing to kill yourself as a person, what's driving that is a transmarginal experience. But in this case, what's happened is a transmarginal experience is that it created this subpersonality, or is really influencing it. But in terms of the type of this young woman who out of the blue versus you as a middle-aged man who over time has literally come to the decision I no longer wish to be alive, what's underneath it all is transmarginal experience. Transmarginal experience. So what we're doing here is basically giving you a core understanding of what is happening for you, or for the majority of people who have or are suicidal. You get, that can be viewed as kind of the third level of suicidal ideation intent. Ideation intent means thinking about suicide and having the intent to kill yourself as a person. The first level is what we would call protective factors. You know, if you have a lot of close relationships and so on, you tend to be protected. Underneath that you have second level, which is subpersonalities, where there's aspect of you as a person that may be suicidal, or orientated in that way, or find life too painful. What you get under that is this third level that we've talked about, which is what's called a transmarginal level, where the experience has been past the point of bearing. And that's the core for the vast majority of people who think about or want to take their own lives. Underneath that, you get what's called a suicidal psyche, where the person's entire psyche becomes dominated by the need, the drive, the will to be dead. And that sort of situation where a person is driven down to the suicidal psyche level, the person is a profound danger to themselves. So when you're doing assessment with a person when you get the sense that the psyche is becoming completely dominated by that. The person cannot be left alone. Absolutely no condition whatsoever can that person be left alone, because the danger of themselves is profound. It will take, when a person goes down to that level, it'll take them about 3 or 4 hours to come through it. When they've come through it, they may never re-experience it again. And that's the very, very sad thing, is people take their own lives for stuff that they've already survived, they've already been through, and for many people, stuff which will never occur again. That young woman who took her own life on a Friday night hammered might never ever again have ever thought about suicide, or thought about it, or whatever. Tragic. For those amongst us, or those amongst you who have more, do not wish to be alive, more existential problem, more existential experience of suicidal ideation, suicidal intent, how it is resolved is the way that the vast majority of challenges, mental health challenges, are resolved, is through self-directed healthcare and recovery. Okay, I'm suicidal, I have difficulties here, what feels right and appropriate for myself, how do I get myself through this? I have a listen around to other people, which is the second aspect of self-directed healthcare and recovery. So you have a listen around and you listen to what feels appropriate for you. If you're not dismissing 90-95% of stuff that you hear from others, you're not listening to yourself. It's that simple. In terms of being with people who are struggling, how do you help? You help by being present, by listening. You want to do an assessment. When somebody first talks about suicide, you want to do an assessment of the degree to which he or she is at risk to themselves. And based on that assessment, you then put in place a gradated response to that, from simply listening and being present, which is the most core part of a helping relationship, to right up to, I will not let the person, you, out of my sight. So depending on the degree of intent, there's various ways. It's not rocket science. You ask people to go on contract that you won't take your own life, and if you're going to take your life, you will ensure that you ring me first, and this sort of stuff. And these are gradated response. You learn it over time, you learn through experience, you learn through listening to other people how they do it, but it is not rocket science. So that is the core issue involved when people are suicidal. And the purpose of this video is to give you the core of it, so that you can go out there and learn more and see where you and your experience fits into this sort of understanding. Okay, so go follow. It's going to be Maggie Go there.